Hi, everyone. There are probably some people from the IOTA community here and various other communities. So yeah, I think that's one of the great things about this is we can bring people around all the world to come together and discuss the same kind of challenges and problems, which is a really beautiful thing. So yeah, wherever you're from, whichever community, it's great to have you here and looking forward to talking about UX a little bit more. About myself, I'm a UX and design director at IOTA. So I lead the UX team. We tackle some of the most challenging problems in DLT alongside other teams that are doing great work. And I've been leading teams for about 10 years. I've been working in the design field for about 15 and various different verticals and other areas of expertise within design, brought all of that into basically solving problems within DLT. So that's a rough bit about myself and my background. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn or have a look at my past history if you want a little bit more detail there. So yeah, that's myself.
Great, thanks, Andrew. What about yourself, Jofo? Do you want to give a quick introduction as well?
For sure. Hey, Ben. Hey, folks. Excited to be here today. My name is Jofo. I work at Polygon, senior product designer. I kind of lead certain initiatives such as UX research, where we kind of empower Web3 communities that we built out, as well as I do Web3 design evangelization, whatever that means, but we'll talk about that hopefully in this call. Past experiences, I worked in digital banking. I worked at the big banks here in Canada. I'm actually all 12 hours beforehand, so I've had my morning coffee. Some other experience that I've worked at startups, leading digital payments and such. So happy to connect on LinkedIn, talk about Web3 design or anything food related. So pretty chill. But thanks. Cheers.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I know that the time difference can be a bit difficult to coordinate, Jofo and Andrew, different time zones, right? So yeah, hope that it's gonna be a good session. Hope that you didn't wake up too early for this. So moving on, maybe you can start the session off by doing a couple of questions from a high-level overview all the way down to the details, to the individual. So we're going to start with the trend-based questions, some of the trends that you've observed. So we're going to start with what are some of the changes that you've observed in terms of the mental models and user patterns on Web 2 versus Web 3 products over the past, based on your experience, what some of the trends that perhaps you've also seen. Maybe, yeah, you can start us off, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, big question. I mean, there are quite significant differences, and the way that I look at it is trying to break down user experience in terms of what segments there are for mental models. And this is something I've defined and to help my own understanding of how we move from Web 2 to Web 3 and trying to get the same kind of high quality experiences and ease of onboarding and so on and so forth. In terms of trends, yeah, we can discuss that a little bit after perhaps just introducing roughly this model, but I would say breaking it down into three different areas. There's three different types of UX that I see. There's a conceptual UX, there's abstracted UX, and there's also the tangible UX. And what I mean by that is conceptual UX is what parameters am I working with? And this might be something that you don't even think about. So you go into an operating system, you know what it does. You use an e-commerce site, you kind of know what it does. Your expectations are set there. The abstracted UX is more about the type of system notifications, stuff where the system is working for you or the product is working for you. It may give you updates, it just keeps you informed, but you're not actually interacting with it. And that's also very important for you to understand what's happening behind the scenes or how you're interacting with this in a passive way. And there's also the base UX, which is the tangible UX, which is where we interact with products and the GUI, the graphical user interface or the user interface itself. And that's where we have good signposting. We know what we need to do or what we can do. We're orientated and that type of thing. So when you take that and then you apply that in terms of where Web 2 is and where Web 3 is, Web 2 has all three of those very well defined because people are very familiar with a lot of the systems now within Web 2, things like e-commerce, and most people who use modern internet are very familiar with the way that they can expect to go through a checkout process and then purchase things and they arrive, so on and so forth. The abstracted UX, the feedback that people get is generally very good. And the tangible UX, again, has been refined. Where I think we are in terms of people's understanding of that in Web3 is we've got to quite a good place with the tangible UX in terms of the signposting, in terms of the UI, in terms of the achieving those tasks. It's very good. The abstracted UX is getting better. So the feedback that you're getting as you're interacting with things, it's not there yet, but it is getting better. And then the conceptual UX, where it comes down to understanding, like, what can I do within this? That's an ever-changing plane of circumstance. So I think when you look at that, what are the sort of mental models that people are using when it goes from Web 2 to Web 3? There's still a lot of confusion, a lot of understanding. It's complex, it's difficult to understand what that conceptual element is of what it's doing and what I can do within this. So we need to improve that, and that's partly through education, that's partly through onboarding, making sure that we make things easy to use, but people understand how they can use it. So that would be one thing that I would see. But in terms of trends, I mean, basically, lots of community, DAOs, DAO building up basically more participation. That's something that is going to be the backbone of Web3 and will continue to be. That's never going to go away. And I would say in terms of trends, just making sure that we're breaking down barriers and we're making the actual web experience more interactive. And that's one of the great things about wallets like MetaMask and other familiar wallets, where it's becoming more interactive with the web as well, which is way better. So we're building on that foundation. So yeah, that just gives you a little taste of where I'm coming from.
Great. That was such a comprehensive answer, describing all the industry trends, the overview. Jofo, you want to give us an overview as well, where you see that headed?
I think I agree, especially with the idea of like conceptual UX right now it's slowly improving with the impact that's the community, like Web3 communities are giving as well. The thing about Web3 is that it's I would say very iterative, and we all know it's very community centric. I mean, that's why there's communities like this right now. I wanted to get back a bit more on the trends, or like really Web3 mental models that I've seen that I also wanted to share. And there's kind of like 4 that I kind of want to highlight. The first one is like the idea of the new profile. People sign in, log in, like let's say on a Facebook or a certain accounts. But that's the new mental model I've seen, as we all know in Web3, is the wallets, right? This is really like your source of information where you hold your NFTs, different types of cryptos. So it's that's where the jump is for users to understand that there isn't really such a thing as a centralized profile anymore. This idea of a decentralized wallet follows you wherever you go. And it's, let's say, quote unquote, easier to log into different experiences without having the scare of like a company owning your data. The second one is the idea of like network effect, but that's really seen through like tokens. Let's say a lot of crypto DeFi communities, the network effect is seen through your token value. So you see an up and coming like meme token. If we have such high like value for that meme token, it creates a network effect for folks to come and join whatever that community is. And then you build a Discord around it, you build Telegram, you start an RDO. Next thing you know, you went from like 500 people to 50,000 because of the hype, but that's also the network effect that happens with the token value. From the idea of token value as well, the third mental model I would want to talk about is token communities, and that they're becoming microeconomies, right? So we've seen that in like, for example, let's say Polygon, where we're starting to do more NFTs. I know a lot of this NFTs is happening on Ethereum and Solana, but because of, let's say, what Polygon brings, like there's a micro community there that people do exchange of NFTs, right? In the Polygon network itself, there's its own like crypto community, so people can buy and trade and do decentralized finances, doing like staking and providing liquidity. Those are actual funds that are happening that are being transacted in between different parties, right? So those are already microeconomies in itself. And finally, a very important core mental model within Web3 is, I would say, the idea of tokens as property rights or governance. You actually own a piece of that company. So maybe some folks haven't worked with governance before, but if you work with a DAO or different places, like if you actually own the token, you can you can vote for the next part of their roadmap. And that's really, you don't see that in Web 2. You don't see that in Web 1. Like Web 1 and Web 2, like especially Web 2 is very centralized in who has the power for those things. And I'm not saying in Web 3, it's fully the power back to the community, but there are steps to make that happen, and governance is a whole new thing. So those are, I would say, mental models and trends that I'm seeing right now.
Great. I think Jofo, you covered on wallet, you covered on token governance, and how it's you're part of an ecosystem, and Andrew, you covered basically the idea of DAOs and how the concepts actually apply. And one recurring theme of that is always about communities, right? How do you bridge communities in a decentralized way, and how do you generate innovation from the bottom up? So on that note, right, actually it brings me to my second question, which is it possible for you to describe maybe in a sentence one of the projects that you're currently working on and how that solves a particular business problem in Web3? Maybe, Andrew, you can go first.
I think you're muted, Andrew, sorry.
How's that? Better? Yeah. Okay. So the first thing that springs to mind is actually a new startup. And this isn't something that I prepared a pitch for, but just to give you a sense of where it will solve a problem, is new startup I'm working on is basically around a design studio, so a venture lab. And what this does will, over time, actually create more of a community through a DAO in order to help steer where those products go. So that governance would become progressively decentralized. And essentially what that means is that those in the community that have that input are able to feel like they can start off by actually giving some input over what is the next trend coming up? Where do we take this particular product next? What type of features are most important to us, rather than the core team just necessarily making all of those decisions. Now, the core team need to have an important vote in that. Otherwise, you end up with a ship that's sailing all over the place. But ultimately, the community also need to get involved. And then you can start creating little pockets of the community that can support that and also be incentivized through the token. But the beauty of this is that when those products launch, those who are actually part of the DAO will then have the opportunity to then get more involved with the success of that product that launches. And there's potential for that to be a network effect. Because they've already had input into that product that's being built, they'll become evangelists for it as well. So for me, I think that's a great place to actually bring community into the product process and the design process and solve all these problems together. Now, you have to set up the ship and set it sailing first. You can't just go straight into a DAO while you're trying to get a startup going, because you won't have the decision making fast enough. But if you set that objective of progressively decentralizing, I think that's the best way to go with most of the Web3 models. And one of the areas where I see a lot of opportunity around design and a design studio. So if there's any interest in that, reach out to me, by the way, because we'll be announcing that very soon. So a company called Third Edge. So yeah, that's my side. So maybe over to you, Jofo. I know that you've probably got some really great ideas around this. Loved your last answer, by the way.
Thanks, Andrew. And honestly, I think from my side of things, it's not really like from the business side of like a UX Web3 thing that would help solve a business issue. I would say like more so maybe like a process within the Web3 space. And I can talk about it more later, but a product that I was working on recently was the faucet at Polygon. And just to give a background on what faucets are, it's primarily used by developers to test like anything, because basically if you create a DeFi product, a centralized finance product where you're using tokens, like real tokens, right? And to see if your contracts actually work, there's no bug issues, there's no security issues. They want to test that out, just like any QA you would do. But there's an interesting thing there where faucets can be used by anyone to test DeFi products. And I think a lot of people are missing this opportunity to kind of get into DeFi to like to test out any of these Web3 experiences because they're scared of using their own money. They can actually use fake money to do that with real experiences. So I think it's like working with this product faucets. It doesn't have to be our Polygon faucet, any faucet in general, to test out things just to get people onboarded. And I think that's a really cool way that even at Polygon, what we do to kind of test like products early on and get user feedback. And that's kind of like the user need within business, like the idea of product building is kind of like what helped answer like that user need, so user feedback.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it ties into the idea of the product market fit, right? And what you're trying to achieve is to test that assumption or your value proposition rigorously, and I think that's a regular occurrence, especially in Web3, because everything is so experimental. So you have to keep on experimenting and testing your theories to try to get the product market fit. So actually, on that note, there is also a sub question. I'd like you guys to participate maybe in a design thinking exercise, right? So you've described about some of the projects that you're working on in Web3, and so a design thinking question to you maybe: how might we optimize the onboarding experience for new users in Web3, and how are they going to be defined in your particular product segment, for example? So let's say if you're working on something related to gaming or analytics, you can perhaps describe more about how you would customize that onboarding experience. Either of you can go first. So whoever has the urge to pitch first. Yeah.
I'll go first, Andrew, if you don't mind. I'll do a quick
Go
thing.
for it. Yeah.
So I think the very first thing that's important, regardless of what vertical you're thinking about, is personas. And that's really key right now in Web3 to understand who you're designing for. And I'm gonna take this from a DeFi, decentralized finance lens. I was working at a DAO before. We built out a wallet, we built out like an automated market maker, and we created our personas. We have like the degens, obviously. We have the crypto curious, crypto evangelists, and we also have the crypto newbies, the crypto noobs. Basically, it kind of tailors like percentage wise, like how many people we believe that are user products that are very new to DeFi versus how many from our community. Because we kind of get that information through the discords and telegrams that we built out from the DAOs and those communities, and kind of like siphon the form, and we understand like who we're actually building for and with, mostly with. I think that's really important in Web3. For onboarding, really, like it's really difficult to imagine a perfect world to onboard everyone, because Web3 was designed for intermediate users by developers. So it's very technically the jargon, and it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to find a way to kind of help like the normal layperson adopt this technology, which is obviously a goal that we have. An interesting piece of UI that I want to highlight. I'm not sponsored by Stargate Finance, but I'm going to talk about Stargate Finance. They have this piece of UI called, if you go to their desktop, it's called walkthrough mode. And it's a whole experience for newer users. It's not in your face, but it's a small button at the side that says walkthrough mode. When you click it, instead of seeing like the normal, like if you've used PancakeSwap, SushiSwap, another AMM or another DAO, like doing swaps or liquidity or whatever, cross-chain swaps, you'd be familiar with the card in the middle where from and how much tokens that you're moving to which chain, or like how many tokens that you're gonna turn it to or whatever. This actually changed that whole experience from like a hand-holding experience. So I think it's interesting like that. I'm not gonna say that's the best way right now, but that is something in comparison to just like throwing someone into the deep end and like, here, you'd better know how many tokens, what this means, how much that is in USD. Maybe that's like how your mind map works. But it's I think Web3 is like constantly testing out new UI ways to kind of help new users. At Polygon, we're starting to do more of sidebars. So and like widget systems, and like if they open up the sidebar, they're like, oh, it's an FAQ, or like you can actually have more drop downs and understand like what people are asking about and learn more. But if you're not a new user, you don't care for those things, so you can just hide it, right? So you can't. It's hard to build an experience where it's like it's in your face for users who knows exactly how to go and navigate it, but you don't want to forget users that are new to the experience, right? So it's really testing out new UIs. Andrew, thoughts?
Yeah, I think you've summarized what will probably be the next big trend if it's not already. I think it's super important. We've been doing a few similar things with some builder teams to build up personas. So we have some process we go through with workshops to understand and define the customer journey and build personas around that as well. And it's all wrapped into one, and then that gives them a real helping hand when it goes to actually designing these experiences. And one of the things that's come out of it is the fact that you cannot design something for everyone, because there are different levels of past experience and knowledge, and people want to achieve different things. So having a bit more of a defined hand-holding experience for certain types of users can be the best way of tackling that particular thing. And then if you're a DeFi degen or someone a bit more experienced, you can just switch off any of the kind of extra information, get straight into the functionality. So I think you summarized that really well. What I have seen that have been really good onboarding experiences, people may want to check out if they want some, a good idea of UX, would be Rabbit Hole. That's Ethereum based, I believe. That's fantastic because it sets certain quests and goals where you can actually learn and earn as you go along, which I think is a brilliant way of incentivizing people. But as a business model, it's also fantastic because you can get collaborations with certain new projects that obviously direct and drive traffic to those particular platforms and give a certain amount of reward. So I love that idea. I love that approach. I love the type of learning experience that is. In terms of just kind of getting into stuff with minimal friction, I think Decentraland have done a pretty good job. They had a metaverse festival last October, I believe, and you could just jump straight into that without any kind of setup. You didn't even need to connect your wallet, and then to get into deeper features, you could do that. So you weren't excluded from basically being onboarded to their product. And I think they've done a great job, and we'll be taking a lot of those types of approaches when we're rolling out products with our builder teams in the IOTA ecosystem. But yeah, two examples. If people haven't already heard of them or aren't familiar, go check them out because they're worth doing.
Cool, thanks. Thanks, guys. So actually on that topic, Andrew, just to follow up, right now, I believe Coinbase is also doing that with the learn as you earn onboarding experience, where you can get a bit of tokens as you navigate through trying to set up an account. I think that's a way that you can incentivize user actions in a way that's immediate. There's also another one, another project which is basically move as you earn, right? So you can move and you earn at the same time, which is interesting as well. And these are perhaps some of the ways that you can offer a bit of crumbs, right, to users as they sort of right through your product. Great. So that's, I think in that process, these are very interesting points that you guys have brought up, and it's very poignant as well. So on a more personal level, though, we're going to move away from trends and go into maybe on a more personal and professional level. Jofo, you look like someone who has an interesting story to tell. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about how you managed to level up your own product design skills, whether it's personal or professionally. How did you, improve over the years?
Yeah, a bit of background. I actually didn't, which I'm starting to see a lot more folks, but I didn't go to school for design at all. I kind of fell into it. I was doing startup way back when, and it was like a Tinder for food, where you can swipe left to right for like end of the day meal. So it was a fun experiment. But doing that startup, it was mostly focused on doing BD, marketing, growth marketing, and stuff. And I was forced to kind of learn design to like speed up the product development process. I kind of fell in love with the process of design, mostly the idea of like talking to people, learning like what like let's say, problems they had, and like how do we create like solutions for those on the digital, maybe even service-based perspective. I think leveling up is really, you can't really rush things as a designer, and as a designer, to level up is to try things and to be okay with failing. And as a designer, doesn't matter how many years you are of experience, there will, I think great designers and like the designers also have like this, what's that term? And so you feel like I forgot like the term for the complex. But like you feel like you're not the best person in space, but you're still trying, you're still doing the work that's there. So I think leveling up is all about like testing things that you learn maybe in your designs. So for example, today I heard about rabbit hole, but I'm learning like, oh great, like onboarding. I might try that for experiences and it might not do well, but it's about actually learning how those processes happen, understanding the UX and decision making, not exactly copying things one to one, but maybe finding ways to improve it and see how it goes. Because you can always try things. You can always iterate after that. You can always get learnings and you can always improve. Because UX is not an art in terms of like, it's not about what's best for you, it's what's best for the people around you. So you're consistently iterating, it's not perfect, right? There's nothing perfect right now in any of the UXs, user experiences out there. There are things that work. It's because a lot of people actually find it to be usable. You've done the tests, you've done the due diligence. And I think that's like, as a designer, everybody wants to rush and be like, oh, a senior lead and stuff like that. And be like, oh, we recognize. But it's like, it's all about the time and effort that you put, the things to try out and iterate, and don't be afraid to fail. And I think that's really important.
Totally. And from the perspective of just growing as a UX designer, understand the process, but don't be a slave to it. Basically, have your toolbox. You don't have to use all the tools every time. There are select tools to use for the job. And what I see a lot of is that UX designers who are coming into Web 2 or Web 3, it doesn't matter. They've basically been shaped and molded to go through this very rigid process each time. And that's great because they get to understand the whole thing, but it's worth just understanding that you can break from that and you can take segments of it, just use the right tools. So like I said, understand the process, but don't be a slave to that process and keep taking on different perspectives. Do lots of reading. UX Collective is a really good blog, has Web 2 and Web 3 stuff on it. It's growing in Web 3. So definitely say explore as much of that as you can. Seek feedback as much as possible, from your peers, from anyone, and particularly from the community in Web 3. And just be open to feedback and don't be too precious about it. And the more you can be open and understand that's part of just the process of you growing, but the product improving, then that's a great sort of perspective and attitude to have as a UX designer. And be collaborative. Solve problems, not just for yourself, not just for the project, but for other people as well. Bring everyone together. You're kind of this person in the middle, and you need to make sure that you're not doing the job of the product manager, but you're making sure that the perspective of the user is aligned with everyone, and that you're being the user advocate in that sense. So you're kind of looking at everything that's happening during a project and making sure that is that going to benefit the end user? Is that aligned to the business objectives? That kind of thing. And that's super important. So being more in that frame of mind helps you to then take on bigger and bigger projects. So yeah, that's through a few years of experience that I found. There's some people do it inherently, some people grow into it. For me, it took me a few years to get there, and that's fine. It took me a good 5 years before I was stepping into bigger shoes. So that's okay. Don't be in a rush, like Jofo says, to try and get the senior and the lead titles, because those spurs have to be earned to a certain degree. Some people are very talented, but the experience comes with time, and that brings richness of approaches, basically, how to deal with something, certain problems, certain challenges. So yeah.
I see. I've heard a lot of understanding about different users and stakeholders. On that note, I think, Andrew, you brought up an interesting point, which is sometimes the users, or you have to negotiate things with the product manager, and sort of the UX's role is to advocate for the users. Now, here's a question that I probably would like to throw back to you, in that I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of these situations where the users have tension, or the UXers have some sort of tension with the product manager. Now, how would you, as a UXer, navigate those sort of situations where there's tensions that arise due to maybe, you know, one party advocating for the user, and then the other one is like, oh, we have a timeline, let's try to meet the timeline. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great perspective. I think from the timeline angle, you can still be an advocate for the user and you can still meet objectives. It just means that that particular feature or something that you really want, you have to be pragmatic about it and actually go, you know what, that can go in the backlog. Let's set a priority on it. It will get done, but it's something that's going to have to wait a little bit, and that's okay. You know, you can't have perfection, but as long as it's being recognized and it's something that will be dealt with, that's you know, a pragmatic approach to balance things. When it comes to arguing the case, then it depends on the person that, of course, is in charge of the decision making, and that is the product manager. And if you're working with someone who is relatively pragmatic, again, they can usually see reason if there is logic behind your decision making. So as a UX designer, it's very important to communicate what is going to make sense. And that goes across Web 2 and Web 3. It is pretty much universal. When it comes to Web 3, you can end up having a lot of discussions with the community who have some really valid points. And again, it has to then be prioritized. And it's about communicating to the community. Yeah, great idea. We've definitely got that in the backlog, but it's going to come a bit later. And you know what? That for most people who have a point and a valid point in the community, that's all they want to hear. It's not that it's going to be in there tomorrow. It's that you've recognized that and you've taken it on board and you're going to action it, even if it's going to come further down the line. So specifically for Web 3, that's important. And the product manager role is a bit less in Web 3 than it is Web 2. So you'll find yourself with those discussions in the community a lot more. And we have a very active Discord community. Some may be here, some maybe not, but they usually have some brilliant points, and particularly around Firefly, which is our desktop and mobile wallet. Then we open up these conversations because it's the most valuable feedback we can have. So I would say that's another thing just to bear in mind. So hopefully that gives a little taste of how you might manage some of these things.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. That was a great answer. I think it was very well comprehensively covered some of how you resolve some of the tensions that may arise. I think because we're approaching the end of this segment, maybe what we could do is we could take questions from the floor. I can see right now there are a couple of questions. Maybe we can start off with. This is actually one of the questions that we prepared, so just going to ask it. Hello, could you share ways you acquire participants to do tests? So I'm assuming user testing, and how do you approach these users in the friendly way? Yeah, so Andrew, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you've got a community, start there. So if you have a community around your Web3 product, which you should be looking to build as much as possible, then absolutely take them on, but you're going to have some bias there. So if you want to do more traditional user testing, then what will happen is that those users, if they're not familiar with Web3 and a lot of the decentralized ways of things working, they're going to point out the things that you already know. You know, things that you know are challenges that have the footing in the way that technology works. So I wouldn't say that it's quite got to the point where, because technology is stable, that we can use more defined user testing at this stage. It's still quite early. You can do if you have an individual who is familiar with decentralization, you can bring them on board, and if you can find them from outside your community, then that's great. But they're not that easy to find. You could go to Reddit, you could go to something else, you could go to another community. You could reach out to them and you could ask, would you be interested in testing another product? That would be a most sensible way of doing it, because ultimately, if you go out there and use a platform that does user testing, it's not always that easy to filter out the Web 2 type of testers from the Web 3 testers. And of course, like I say, you're just going to come up with the same things that you already know, obvious problems that are obvious to you that you're working through, bigger problems. Like, I don't understand why I need to on board with a secret phrase, or this thing is difficult, that thing is difficult. I don't understand why I need to do this or that. And of course, these are things that we're solving in the medium term or long term. So that's one thing I would say. Community first, definitely community. And then if you don't have a community, then reach out into other communities and see if you can entice them. Amazon gift voucher, something where, maybe there's a bit of monetary incentive. Maybe there's some tokens from your particular project. If you haven't launched any tokens, then yeah, use some other means of sending something to someone like an Amazon voucher. That's what we used to do in Web2 quite a lot, just to incentivize people.
Great.
Yeah, just to bring up a point that Andrew talked about is about being like working with your community. And I think that really worked well. Two things I would do, especially with building these communities. One, preparation, and what Andrew mentioned is rewards. And that kind of worked out. And kind of a story I wanted to share was that when you prepare for these like build out a notion, like you don't just like go out there and message random folk without a goal in mind. You really need to build like a personal product requirement doc, or just like a UX document of like, what's your goal for building this community? What do you want to do later on? And that kind of forms exactly how you want to approach users, and maybe prepare a form. So what we did, just to give folks an idea, we had already community from, let's say, an IDO that we did. We were doing NFTs as well from this DAO. From here, we kind of build a type form, survey monkey of like who these users are. We ask them if they're developers, PMs, designers, are they students, are they just curious? And that will help you in the long run into segmenting the type of people you want to test depending on the product that you're building, right? You want to think ahead for those, but really what enticed even more people was the rewards. So funny story, we didn't give away our governance token. We created, part of my French, a shit token that we just like named it very fun, like pop or something. And you get the pop token if you do this form, you get 5 pop tokens. Like really brand the heck out of it and make it fun. And then if you do a user interview with us, you get like 20 tokens. To be completely honest, like the community knew it had no value. You can't swap it for Ethereum or whatever and actually make money of it. But people were going crazy for it, and our developers just built it. So just as a really fun idea, like it's going to be time and effort for sure, but I think it's fun because you're really involving the community. I remember when like at times the token was going down, people were like, oh, defend it, and like, can you give us more of this token? I'm like, okay, but it doesn't have any intrinsic value, but like people wanted to be part of it. So it was a really cool thing to test out with Web3 communities. I think like that's maybe
totally stealing that idea, Jofo. Totally stealing that idea.
You did. I honestly, everyone should be doing it for the user testing. It's like, oh, you should get this free, like, but it's really fun. It really shows what the Web3 community is all about.
Nice.
That's an amazing and fun way. Actually, it's like thinking out the box, right? Not just like, oh, user testing is there here. Actually creating new ways to engage your user. That's really good. I think that's almost all the time we have today. So maybe what we could do just before we end off, Alina, do we have room for one more question? Nicholas, do we have time for one more, or?
Yeah, maybe just one more.
Okay, great. So I think this is probably on some of the audience's minds right now, which is how, as a designer, how would you transition? Let's say if you're already in a UXer, how would you transition from say Web 2 to Web 3? And are there any what are the things to consider? So Jofo, do you want to? Yeah.
I'll start. I think one thing about transitioning is like Web3 and Web2 and Web3 are just, I think where it's like, I think really it's about being a designer. Web3 shouldn't be a fad to you if you're coming into the space. I think Web3 is about like being a designer. Web3 is just being a designer with the right fundamentals. right? Like I think you should, to be a Web3 designer, you should also be a Web2 designer, right? You should just be a designer who understands how to unpack the user needs, unpack your business needs, how to iterate, how to be humble in like your findings and your testings, right? These are things that are not just intrinsic to Web3. So I think that's really important to make sure that's your core value rather than, oh, Web3 is a hype, I should be about to design it. I really think that that's not the right way to think about going to the space. It's a really fun space, I agree, but I think it's all about solving problems at the end of the day. Something in Web3 that I do encourage folks, if you are moving into Web3, is really testing out experiences, right? How do you already have a wallet? Do you have an NFT maybe? Like it doesn't have to be like a CryptoPunks. Please don't purchase CryptoPunks. Like you don't need to if you're getting into it, but if you can, sure, why not? But like, do you understand the process of getting your wallet set up, getting your NFTs, what DeFi means, and like have you staked something before in a pool? Do you understand what these fees are, what gas is? These are really important patterns and experiences that are happening right now, and you consistently need to explore these things and try them out, and maybe recreate those designs yourself and understand the space. And I think that's really key. Like I talked about the faucet before. If you're scared to use your own money, try the faucet, get free test tokens that have no value, but able to actually try these experiences out and maybe recreate them. That I think will separate you from just a usual designer, because you're designing by doing the actions instead of like going in blind and like, oh, this seems to work, versus like, let's try it out, you know. So Andrew, feel free to end it.
Yeah, thanks, Jofo. I think really good points. Just the only thing I can think of really to add to that would be just think about why you want to get into Web3 and align with the concept of decentralization and what that offers as value. And if you can do that, then all the rest will come. And that's probably the most key thing. Like, what problems is it actually solving for society or on a wider scale? And it is, because you look at the way that it's enabling new ways of doing things within commerce, or you look at the way that it's actually enabling people to transact value when they don't have a bank, or all of these things in between. But understand what that's offering and then align with it. And if you are aligned with that principle of where it's going, then you can be there to create the solutions. And if you're a naturally curious person, then Web3 is going to be your playground. And think of yourself rather than a UX designer as today's inventor and innovator. You're solving problems that have not been solved before, and you're getting them in front of people. And you might not do it perfectly, but you are doing that. So you can call yourself a true innovator in that sense. So I would say, yeah, just do your research and understand where it's going and why you need to be part of it. And if you're looking at it and going, I need to be part of that because that is me, then I'd say go for it. If you're thinking, I want a stable kind of basis for my career, and I want to, define processes that are very much in place and optimized, and I want to be part of a larger team and all of those things, then Web 2 is probably a great place for you to think about too. It's not, it's not being ruled out at this point. It's not defunct, but Web 3 is a fantastic playground for innovation and ideas. If that's what excites you, then get in there and reach out to me if you're looking for an opportunity. Love to hear from you. But also immerse yourself in things like various books. A couple that I can think of is Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth. That's a really good book that talks about how basically the financial system is changing, how society is changing. Another one, a podcast called Hidden Forces, really good. Again, talks about society, and all these tie into a bigger narrative about decentralization and the value. So just a couple of things that people might want to think about. But yeah, that's my perspective on why we're all here. But yeah, be curious. That's the most important thing.
Great. So to wrap it up, I suppose you could summarize it to stay, and you could say, however, try it. Stay foolish, stay hungry, right? So that's one way to put it. So
always, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Thank you so much, Andrew and Jofo, for this segment. I hope that everybody here has had a wonderful time learning more about UX in Web3. And yeah, so it seems like we've got quite a full house today. Back to you, Alina or Nicholas.
Thanks so much, Ben. Yeah, maybe just to conclude, so I think just want to say thanks again to the three panelists, Andrew, Jofo, and Ben. I think they've really shared many thought-provoking and useful insights. And I think if they could probably go on for another hour or so. But if you really want to, reach out to them to pick their brains or to just keep updated of what they're building, do follow their LinkedIns and their socials as below. And also we would like to, just highlight our upcoming in real life events, mainly the Web3 Founders Networking event. Due to the overwhelming response, it's currently closed to public. So now it's currently by invite only. So if you are a Web3 builder or founder, do reach out to Elena or Kuah. And also we have this really cool Talent at Web3 free boxing classes, exclusive Web3 fitness meetup. So the next one is on Saturday, the 27th of August. There are still available slots. Do reach out also if you're interested. So without, if there's all else, if you want to continue to keep updated with all our trainings, all our learning sessions, as well as our other events, do follow us on Telegram and on other channels as well. And then back to you, Elena.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for being part of tonight's session, and of course to Andrew, Ben, and Jofo. I learned a lot as always. And I guess we'll see each other soon, in person or whatever. Right. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.